I never thought a baptism could break a family apart. But there I was, standing in the back of St. Mary's Chapel, clutching my purse so tight my knuckles had gone white, while my sister-in-law Rebecca practically hissed in my ear, "You don't belong here, Monica. This is for real family only." The words hit me like ice water, especially with my 8-year-old son David standing right beside me in his best Sunday clothes, holding the gift we'd wrapped so carefully the night before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca's eyes were cold, calculating, the same look she'd perfected over the years whenever she wanted to remind me that I was an outsider in the Thompson family. "Real family," she repeated, loud enough for the people around us to hear, loud enough for David to catch every poisonous word. I still remember the exact moment I knew this day would come. It wasn't the first time Rebecca had tried to push me out, but it was the first time she'd done it so publicly, so cruelly, and right in front of my son. We were there for little Emma's baptism, Rebecca's daughter, David's cousin, and what should have been a celebration of new life and family unity had turned into a battlefield. David looked up at me with those big brown eyes, confused and hurt, and I could see the question forming on his lips before he even asked it. "Mom, what does she mean we're not real family?" The chapel was filled with the warm scent of lilies and burning candles, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Everyone looked so peaceful, so reverent, dressed in their Sunday best, holding programs with Emma's name printed in elegant script. It was supposed to be beautiful. It was supposed to be about love and commitment and welcoming a child into the community of faith. Instead, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of whispered judgments and sideways glances. Rebecca stood there, in her powder blue dress, the one she'd probably spent weeks picking out, her blonde hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the devoted aunt and sister-in-law. To everyone else, she probably looked like she was just having a quiet conversation with me. They couldn't see the venom in her voice, the way her smile never reached her eyes, the deliberate cruelty of her timing. She'd waited until we were surrounded by family, until David was close enough to hear, until it would cause maximum damage. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to make a scene in God's house. "We're here because Emma is David's cousin, because this is his family too." Rebecca's laugh was soft but sharp. "Oh, honey, you really don't get it, do you? Just because you married into this family doesn't make you one of us. And David." She paused, looking down at my son with something that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't far from it. "Well, let's just say blood is thicker than water." I felt my chest tighten. David's hand found mine, small and warm and trusting, and I squeezed it gently. He didn't understand what was happening. Not really, but he could feel the tension radiating off me like heat from a furnace. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son, about his place in the world, about whether he would grow up knowing he belonged somewhere or always feeling like an outsider looking in. The thing is, I'd been dealing with Rebecca's passive-aggressive comments for years. Ever since I married her brother Michael 5 years ago, she'd found subtle ways to remind me that I wasn't born a Thompson, that I didn't have their history, their traditions, their unspoken rules and expectations. When we had family dinners, she'd talk about childhood memories I wasn't part of. When we gathered for holidays, she'd reference inside jokes I didn't understand. When family photos were taken, she'd somehow always position herself so I was slightly outside the main group. But Michael, my husband, he either didn't notice or chose not to see it. He loved his sister, respected her opinion, valued family harmony above almost everything else. When I tried to talk to him about Rebecca's behavior, he'd brush it off with phrases like, "That's just how she is," or "She doesn't mean anything by it," or "You're being too sensitive." After a while, I stopped bringing it up. It was easier to keep the peace, to bite my tongue, to focus on building my own little family with Michael and David. David had come into our lives when he was 3 years old. Michael and I had been trying to have children for 2 years with no success, and when the opportunity arose to adopt David through the state foster system, it felt like destiny. He'd been through so much already in his short life, bounced between homes, never quite finding his place. And when he looked up at us with those serious brown eyes during our first meeting, I knew he was meant to be ours. Michael felt it too. We both did. The adoption process was long, complicated, emotionally exhausting. There were home visits, background checks, interviews, court dates, mountains of paperwork. But every step was worth it the day we could officially call David our son, the day he could call us mom and dad without any legal complications or social worker supervision. I remember him practicing in the mirror. "Hi, I'm David Thompson," trying on his new name like a coat that finally fit. Michael's parents, Helen and Robert, had welcomed David with open arms from the beginning. They were in their 70s, gentle souls who believed love made a family, not genetics. Helen would bake David's favorite cookies, and Robert would teach him to fish in the pond behind their house. They never made him feel different or less than. They made him feel chosen, special, wanted. But Rebecca was different. She was younger than Michael by 3 years, unmarried at the time, and seemed to view our little family with something between skepticism and resentment. She never said anything directly, but there were looks, comments, the way she'd refer to David as Monica's boy instead of using his name or calling him her nephew. When she finally got married to James 2 years later and became pregnant with Emma, almost immediately, her attitude toward David became even more pointed. "Some people are just meant to have children," she'd said once at a family barbecue, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, looking directly at me. "It's different when they're really yours, you know? That natural connection, that bond. It's something you can't replicate." Michael had been grilling burgers at the time and either didn't hear her or pretended not to. David was playing in the yard with the other kids, too far away to catch the implication. But I heard it. I felt it like a slap across the face. The suggestion that my love for David was somehow artificial, that our family was less real because we didn't share DNA. Now, standing in the chapel with Rebecca's words hanging in the air, like smoke, I realized she'd been building up to this moment for years. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst or a misunderstanding. This was calculated, deliberate, designed to put me in my place once and for all. And she'd chosen the most sacred public venue possible to do it. "Rebecca," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "this is your daughter's baptism. Can we please not do this here? Not now?" She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Do what? I'm just being honest. This is a family ceremony, Monica. For real family members. I'm sure you understand." David tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, what's happening? Why is Aunt Rebecca being mean?" The innocence in his voice nearly broke my heart. At 8 years old, he was old enough to sense conflict, but young enough to still believe the adults in his life would protect him from it. He trusted me to make sense of the world for him, to keep him safe from the kind of cruelty that could make a child question their worth, their place, their right to exist in the spaces they'd always called home. I knelt down to his level, my hand on his shoulder, looking into those beautiful brown eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. "Nothing's happening, sweetheart. Aunt Rebecca is just confused about something, but we'll figure it out." But even as I said it, I could see Rebecca's satisfied smile, the way she'd already turned her attention back to the other family members, dismissing us like we were strangers who'd wandered into the wrong building. Other people were starting to stare now, sensing the tension even if they couldn't hear the words. Michael's cousin Sarah raised an eyebrow in our direction. His uncle Frank whispered something to his wife Martha, who glanced over at us with curiosity. The baptism was about to begin. The priest, Father Martinez, was taking his place at the front of the chapel, adjusting his white robes, preparing to welcome little Emma into the Christian community. Family members were finding their seats, pulling out phones to capture the moment, settling in for what should have been a joyful spiritual experience. But I couldn't move. I couldn't pretend everything was fine, couldn't take my seat and smile for the cameras, and act like Rebecca hadn't just tried to erase my son's existence from his own family. Because that's what she'd done, really. She'd looked at an 8-year-old boy and told him he didn't belong, that his love wasn't real enough, that his place at the table wasn't secure. "Where's Michael?" I asked, looking around for my husband, hoping he could mediate this situation before it got any worse. "Oh, he's busy with important family business," Rebecca said sweetly. "Real family business. I'm sure he'll be along soon to collect you both." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable now. She wasn't even trying to hide her disdain anymore. This was her moment, her daughter's special day, her chance to establish the hierarchy once and for all. And she'd decided that David and I belonged at the bottom of it. I stood up slowly, my hand still on David's shoulder, and looked Rebecca directly in the eyes. For years, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who swallowed her pride and smiled through the insults and kept quiet, for the sake of family harmony. But not today. Not when my son was involved. Not when she'd crossed the line from passive aggression to outright cruelty. "You know what, Rebecca?" I said, my voice steady but carrying clearly across the small space between us. "You're right about one thing. Family is important. Real family. The kind that shows up for each other, that protects each other, that loves unconditionally." She blinked, clearly not expecting me to push back. "And real family," I continued, "doesn't try to make children feel unwanted at a baptism. Real family doesn't use a sacred ceremony as an opportunity to settle petty scores. Real family remembers that love is what makes us connected, not genetics." David squeezed my hand, and I could feel some of the adults around us starting to pay attention, sensing that something significant was happening. Rebecca's cheeks flushed pink, but her jaw was set in that stubborn line I'd come to know so well. "You can dress it up however you want, Monica," she said, her voice dropping lower but losing none of its edge. "But at the end of the day, David isn't really a Thompson. He's your charity case, your consolation prize because you couldn't have real children. And everyone in this family knows it, even if they're too polite to say it out loud." The chapel went quiet around us. Not the reverent quiet of worship, but the shocked quiet of people who couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. Someone gasped softly. I heard Michael's Aunt Helen make a small, distressed sound from her seat near the front. David looked up at me, his eyes wide, his face pale. He'd heard every word. He'd understood enough to know he was being rejected, dismissed, told he wasn't good enough. In that moment, I saw something break in his expression, a piece of his innocence that I knew I might never be able to fully repair. But I also saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of determination, of quiet strength that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this brave little boy in the first place. He reached into his jacket pocket, the one where I'd helped him store his small backup inhaler and some tissue. But instead of either of those things, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence of the chapel. "Can I show everyone something?" I looked down at David, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the chapel could hear it. The folded paper in his small hands looked so ordinary, just a piece of white paper with creases from being carried around. But something about the way he held it, the quiet confidence in his voice, made me pause. Rebecca was still standing there, with that smug expression, clearly expecting me to discipline David for interrupting adult conversation, but I found myself nodding instead. "What do you want to show everyone, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David unfolded the paper carefully, his movements deliberate and precise. I recognized it immediately and felt my breath catch in my throat. It was his adoption certificate, the official document that made him legally and permanently a Thompson. I'd given him a copy months ago when he'd asked about his real papers for a school project about family history. He'd kept it in his special box with his other important things, his first tooth, his favorite baseball card, a photo of us at the zoo. I had no idea he'd been carrying it with him. "This says I'm David Michael Thompson," he announced, his young voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent chapel. "It's got the judge's signature and everything. It says Mom and Dad adopted me on March 15th, 3 years ago. It says I'm their real son forever and always." The chapel erupted in whispers. People were craning their necks to see what was happening. Phones were coming out to record, and I could see Michael pushing through the crowd from the back where he'd been talking to his uncle about something. His face was flushed, probably from running, and he looked completely bewildered by the scene unfolding in front of him. Rebecca's face had gone from pink to white to an alarming shade of red. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words, but nothing came out. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, she was speechless. David wasn't finished. He turned to face not just Rebecca, but the entire gathered family, holding his adoption papers up so everyone could see the official seal, the legal language, the signatures that made it real. "My mom says adoption means being chosen special. She says some kids get born into families, but some kids get picked out on purpose because their moms and dads wanted them so much they went to court and promised a judge they'd love them forever." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of fierce pride watching my 8-year-old son stand up for himself, for us, for our family in a way I'd never been able to do. He wasn't angry or defensive. He was simply stating facts, presenting evidence, telling the truth with the kind of clarity that only children possess. Michael finally reached us, his breathing heavy, his eyes darting between David, Rebecca, and me, trying to piece together what had happened. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. Before I could answer, David turned to his father with complete trust and honesty. "Dad, Aunt Rebecca said I'm not real family and me and Mom don't belong at Emma's baptism. But I have my papers that say I'm your real son, so I wanted to show everyone." The color drained from Michael's face as he processed what David had said. His eyes snapped to Rebecca, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my gentle, peacekeeping husband. Anger. Real, righteous anger that made his jaw clench and his hands ball into fists at his sides. "Rebecca," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What exactly did you say to my wife and my son?" Rebecca finally found her voice, but it came out smaller than usual, defensive. "I was just trying to explain that this is a family ceremony, Michael. I didn't mean anything by it." "You told an 8-year-old child he wasn't family?" Michael's voice was rising now, carrying across the chapel, and I could see his parents, Helen and Robert, making their way over, concern etched on their faces. "You told my son he didn't belong here?" "I didn't say that exactly," Rebecca stammered, but her protest sounded weak, even to her own ears. David stepped forward again, still holding his adoption papers, still speaking with that devastating childhood honesty. "She said blood is thicker than water, and I'm not really a Thompson and Mom's just pretending I'm her real kid because she couldn't have better ones." The gasp that went up from the family was audible. Helen Thompson put her hand to her chest, her face crumpling with shock and grief. Robert's expression darkened in a way I'd never seen from the gentle older man. Even Father Martinez had paused in his preparations, clearly hearing the commotion and wondering whether to intervene. Michael took a step toward his sister and, for a moment, I thought he might actually raise his voice in a house of worship. But instead, he knelt down to David's level, his hands gentle on our son's shoulders, his voice tender despite the fury I could see in his eyes. "David," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay? You are my son. You are Monica's son. You are a Thompson, legally, spiritually, and in every way that matters. That paper you're holding proves it to the world, but we didn't need proof. We knew it the day we met you. We knew it the day we brought you home. We knew it every single day since then?" David nodded seriously, processing this confirmation of what he already knew in his heart. Michael stood up and faced Rebecca again, his protective father instincts fully activated. "And you," he said, his voice carrying across the now completely silent chapel. "You owe my family an apology, a real one. Not your usual half-hearted excuse, but a genuine apology for trying to make a child feel unwanted at his own cousin's baptism." Rebecca looked around the chapel, probably just now realizing how many people had witnessed this entire exchange. How many family members were looking at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. Her carefully constructed image, as the perfect aunt, the family organizer, the keeper of traditions, was crumbling in real time. "I didn't mean for it to come out wrong," she said weakly, but the damage was already done. "No," said a voice from behind us, and we all turned, to see Helen Thompson approaching, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by something steely and determined. "You meant exactly what you said, Rebecca. You've been meaning it for years." My mother-in-law stopped in front of Rebecca, and despite being a foot shorter and 20 years older, she somehow seemed to tower over her daughter. "I've watched you make little comments, drop hints, exclude Monica and David from family discussions for 5 years now. I kept thinking you'd grow out of it, that you'd realize how cruel you were being. But this? Attacking a child at a baptism? This crosses every line." Robert joined his wife, his arm around her shoulders, his disappointment clear. "That boy is our grandson," he said simply. "He's been our grandson since the day Michael and Monica brought him home. The fact that you can't see that you'd try to make him feel otherwise, is shameful." Other family members were nodding, murmuring agreement. I could see Michael's cousins, his aunts and uncles, people who'd known Rebecca her entire life, looking at her with a mixture of shock and disappointment. This wasn't just about David and me anymore. This was about who Rebecca really was underneath all her perfect appearances. James, Rebecca's husband, appeared at her side looking mortified. He'd obviously just learned what had happened, probably, from one of the other family members, and his face was pale with embarrassment. "Rebecca, what have you done?" he whispered, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Baby Emma, blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding her special day, started fussing in her father's arms. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the chapel, reminding everyone why we were there in the first place. Father Martinez cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should proceed with the baptism," he suggested gently. "This is a day of celebration, of welcoming a child into God's family. Let's focus on that joy." But David wasn't ready to let it go yet. With the fearlessness of childhood and the security of knowing he was loved and supported, he walked directly to Rebecca, still holding his adoption papers. "Aunt Rebecca," he said, his voice clear and steady, "I'm sorry you don't think I'm real family, but this paper says I am, and Mom and Dad say I am, and Grandma and Grandpa say I am. So I think maybe you're the one who's confused about what family means." The 8-year-old wisdom in those words hit the chapel like lightning. Here was a child who'd been through foster care, who'd experienced real abandonment and uncertainty, teaching a grown woman about the meaning of family. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Rebecca's face crumpled then, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like grief. Whether it was grief for the relationship she'd damaged, for the reputation she'd destroyed, or for something deeper that had driven her to this moment, I couldn't tell. But for the first time, she looked genuinely affected by what she'd done. "David," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're right. You are family. You've always been family." It wasn't the most eloquent apology in the world, but coming from Rebecca, who rarely admitted fault about anything, it felt significant. David studied her face for a moment, weighing her words with the seriousness of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for survival. "It's okay," he said finally. "But you should probably apologize to my mom too. She was really sad when you were being mean." All eyes turned to me then, and I realized I was expected to say something, to either accept Rebecca's apology or continue the confrontation. But looking at David, seeing how he'd handled this situation with such grace and maturity, I knew what I had to do. "Rebecca," I said, "I accept your apology, but I need you to understand something. David isn't just legally our son. He's not a consolation prize or a charity case or anything less than any other child in this family. He's our miracle. He's the answer to our prayers. And if you can't see that, if you can't treat him with the love and respect he deserves, then maybe you need to think about what kind of aunt you want to be." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streaks. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't know why I said those things. I don't know why I've been so mean," David supplied helpfully, and despite everything, a few people chuckled. "Yes," Rebecca admitted. "Mean. I've been mean, and that's not who I want to be. Especially not to you, David. You're a good kid. You're a really good kid." Michael put his arm around my shoulders, pulling both David and me close. "He's the best kid," he said firmly. "And Monica is the best mother. They're both exactly what this family needed, whether you realized it or not." Father Martinez approached our little group, his expression kind but purposeful. "If we're all ready," he said gently, "I believe we have a baptism to celebrate. And I can't think of a better way to start than by remembering that families come together in many different ways, but they're all blessed when they're built on love." David carefully folded his adoption papers and put them back in his pocket. "Can I be Emma's big cousin now?" he asked Rebecca. "I've been practicing how to be a good big cousin." Rebecca's smile was watery but genuine. "You can be whatever kind of cousin you want to be, David. Emma is lucky to have you." As we all moved toward the front of the chapel for the baptism ceremony, I felt Michael's hand squeeze mine. "I'm proud of you," he whispered in my ear. "And I'm proud of our son. I'm sorry I haven't seen how Rebecca was treating you both. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better." "You're protecting us now," I whispered back. "That's what matters." The baptism itself was beautiful. Emma gurgled happily as Father Martinez blessed her with holy water, surrounded by family members, who'd just been reminded what family really meant. David stood next to us, his hand in mine, watching his baby cousin with the protective love of a big brother. When the priest spoke about welcoming children into the community of faith, about the promises families make to love and protect and guide them, the words felt especially meaningful. After the ceremony, as people milled around taking photos and congratulating James and Rebecca, several family members approached us. Sarah, Michael's cousin, hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm sorry that happened to you. It was wrong." Uncle Frank shook David's hand solemnly and told him he was proud of how he'd handled himself. Aunt Martha made a point of asking David about school, about his hobbies, treating him with the attention and interest she'd show any beloved nephew. But the moment that meant the most came when Helen and Robert pulled David aside for a private conversation. I watched from across the room as they sat with him on a bench outside the chapel, Helen's arm around his shoulders, Robert gesturing expressively as he spoke. When they finished talking, David ran back to me with the biggest smile I'd seen from him all day. What were Grandma and Grandpa talking to you about? I asked. They said they want to put my adoption papers in their family album, David said, practically bouncing with excitement. Right next to Dad's baby pictures and Aunt Rebecca's school photos. They said it's one of the most important documents in our whole family because it's the day I officially became a Thompson. I felt my eyes fill with tears again, but these were purely happy tears. Helen and Robert had found the perfect way to honor David's place in the family, to make his adoption not something to be hidden or apologized for, but something to be celebrated and preserved. As we prepared to leave the chapel, Rebecca approached us one more time. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained, but determined. "Monica," she said, "I know I have a lot of work to do to make this right, but I was wondering, would you and David like to come to dinner next week? Just our families? I'd like to start over if you'll let me." I looked down at David, who shrugged with the easy forgiveness of childhood. "Can we bring dessert?" he asked. "I know how to make chocolate chip cookies now." Rebecca's smile was the first genuine one I'd seen from her in years. "I would love that," she said. The drive home was quiet, but peaceful. David dozed in the back seat, emotionally exhausted from the day's events, but secure in the knowledge that he was loved and wanted and belonged. Michael and I talked softly about what had happened, about how proud we were of our son, about how we could move forward as a family. "You know what the best part of today was?" I asked Michael as we pulled into our driveway. "What's that?" "Watching David stand up for himself, watching him know his own worth. No matter what Rebecca or anyone else ever says, he knows who he is. He knows he belongs. That's something no one can ever take away from him." Michael smiled and reached over to squeeze my hand. "He learned that from you," he said. "He learned it from us," I corrected. "From being loved unconditionally, from having parents who fought for him, who chose him, who made sure he knew every single day that he was wanted and valued and cherished." That night, as I tucked David into bed, he asked me to read his adoption papers to him one more time. We'd done this ritual hundreds of times over the years, but tonight it felt especially significant. As I read the legal language that transformed him from a child in foster care to our son, David interrupted me at his favorite part. "Read the part about forever again, Mom." I found the section he meant, the part that made the adoption permanent and irrevocable. It says that you are now and shall forever be the legal son of Monica Elizabeth Thompson and Michael James Thompson, with all the rights and privileges thereof. "What does privileges thereof mean again?" he asked, even though he knew the answer. "It means all the good things that come with being our son. It means you get to live with us forever. It means we'll always take care of you. It means you get to be part of our family for your whole life, no matter what." David nodded contentedly. "Even if people say mean things about adoption?" "Especially then," I said firmly. "Because adoption isn't something that happens to you, sweetheart. It's something wonderful that happens for you. It means you were so special, so wanted, that we went to court and promised a judge we'd love you forever. Not everyone gets chosen like that." "I know," David said sleepily. "That's why I kept my papers in my pocket today, in case anyone forgot how special I am." I kissed his forehead and turned off his lamp, leaving just his nightlight glowing softly. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Mom? Yes, baby?" "I'm glad Aunt Rebecca was mean today." I turned back, surprised. "Why?" "Because now everyone knows I'm a real Thompson. Now everyone knows I belong here, and now Aunt Rebecca knows it too." Out of the mouths of babes. My 8-year-old son had just articulated something I'd been struggling to understand myself. Sometimes conflict brings clarity. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, is the only way to establish your place in the world. The next few weeks brought changes I hadn't expected. Rebecca called several times, not to make excuses, but to genuinely apologize and to ask how she could do better. She sent David a card with a handwritten note telling him how proud she was of his courage. She even asked Helen for advice on how to be a better aunt, how to make up for years of subtle exclusion and thoughtless comments. The dinner she'd invited us to turned out to be the beginning of a real relationship, not just tolerance for family harmony's sake. She asked David about his interests, remembered details from their conversations, included him in family planning discussions. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was a genuine effort to change. More importantly, other family members started speaking up when they witnessed exclusionary behavior, not just toward us but in general. David's brave stand had created a ripple effect, reminding everyone that family isn't about perfection or uniformity, but about acceptance and love. The adoption papers went into Helen and Robert's family album as promised, right between a photo of Michael's first steps and a newspaper clipping about Rebecca's high school graduation. David was so proud the day they showed him, pointing out his official documents to anyone who would look. 6 months later, at Emma's first birthday party, I watched David carefully help his baby cousin blow out her candle, both of them giggling as wax flew everywhere. Rebecca caught my eye across the room and smiled, a real smile full of warmth and gratitude. She mouthed, "Thank you," and I nodded back, understanding. Thank you for showing me what family really means. Thank you for not letting me damage this relationship beyond repair. Thank you for raising a son who could teach us all about courage and forgiveness. But mostly, I think she was thanking me for not giving up on her, for believing that people could change if they really wanted to, for modeling the kind of grace that David had shown her that day in the chapel. As I watched my son help his cousin, completely secure in his place in our family, completely confident in his belonging, I realized that the woman who'd once told me I couldn't have real children had been wrong about everything. David wasn't my consolation prize. He wasn't my second choice. He wasn't a substitute for something better. He was my first choice, my only choice, my perfect choice. He was the child I was meant to raise, the son I was meant to love, the person who would teach me more about courage and resilience and the true meaning of family than I ever could have imagined. And on that day in the chapel, when an 8-year-old boy pulled out a piece of paper and proved his place in the world, he wasn't just defending his right to be there. He was defending the rights of every adopted child, every blended family, every person who'd ever been told they didn't quite belong. He was saying, with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through uncertainty and come out stronger, that families are built on love, not genetics. That belonging is about choice, not chance. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and trust that love will win. And in our case, it did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.